Lam Kor-Wan was someone who always struggled socially. He didn't have a great relationship with his father, plus he could barely make friends at school, let alone talk to women. So when his dad kicked him out after an argument, he had nothing but time to himself, so his perverted sexual urges only increased. It started with him hoarding porn magazines, then it progressed to peeping at his younger sister in the bathroom. Lam then became a taxi driver in 1978, also joining a photography club. He usually drove at night as it suited his personality, but with the camera, he started taking explicit photos of multiple women without their consent, leading to him getting a negative reputation in the community. Both of these interests would combine into one of the most notorious killing sprees in the history of Hong Kong. Welcome to history's biggest villains. Lam Kwok-Yui was born on May 22, 1955 in British Hong Kong. From 1957 to 1962, his dad worked for a petroleum company in Brunei. Lam and his sister went to live with his mother in the company's dorm, together with his father's concubine and his half-siblings. In December 1962, Lam returned to Hong Kong with his family, where they moved into their own home in Kwang Tung, as he attended a government elementary school, usually performing within the top 10 of his class. In 1970, his father opened a motorcycle shop and asked him to help out after school every day, which led to a decline in his grades and the relationship with his father, who often berated him, ultimately driving him away from home. After graduating from secondary school, he continued to work in his father's shop, and then as an air conditioning apprentice. In early 1973, Lam was kicked out of his house after an argument with his father. He was then arrested after threatening a woman with a knife and touching her genitals near a public toilet in Hung Hom. After 102 days of treatment at Castle Peak Hospital, he was discharged and temporarily renamed Lam Yao Kwang. When he was 19, his family noticed his abnormal behavior along with his interest in female flesh. He was then caught peeping at his sister's naked body outside the toilet of his residence in Kwang Tung. In 1978, Lam got a cab license and changed his name to Lam Kor-Wan after he officially became a cab driver, choosing the night shift due to his introverted nature. In 1981, he suddenly became interested in photography and joined a photography club. 1 year after he started driving, his mother noticed that his behavior had changed significantly, highlighted by his refusal to change clothes or even take showers. Unbeknownst to his parents, Lam had a severe porn addiction, taking several pictures of the women in the magazines. Even though he was in his late 20s, he still lived with his parents and shared a room with his younger brother, so he stored his magazine collection in a metal ammunition box. When that wasn't enough to satisfy him, he eventually bought a Polaroid camera and started sneaking under the doors in the public toilets to take pictures underneath women's skirts, as he was usually chased out of the bathroom and down the street when he was caught. By 1982, he chose to use his occupation to carry out some of the most gruesome acts in the history of Hong Kong. On February 3rd, he picked up 22-year-old nightclub dancer Chan Fung Lan outside the Chinese Palace nightclub and restaurant on Kimberley Road. This was around 4 in the morning after Chan had been drinking with friends. He drove her to Kwang Tung. Then he stopped the cab. He grabbed an electrical cord from underneath the seat and strangled her to death. In a pattern he would follow for the rest of his criminal career, he took her body home and hid it under the sofa, as this again was the same apartment he shared with his family. A few hours later, Lam used money from her wallet to buy an electric saw. The next morning after his family left, he pulled Chan's body out from under the couch, stripped her naked, and took several pictures. He then set up a camera, lined his bedroom with plastic, and recorded himself dismembering the body, cutting the corpse in several pieces. He even titled the video, calling it Serious Secrets. Her sexual organs were placed in a plastic box to be preserved with rice wine. Then the rest of her body was wrapped in newspaper and placed in a plastic bag. Lam disposed of it in the Shing Mung River. On May 29th, he picked up 31-year-old cashier Chan Wang Kit outside Wusong Street at 5:20 a.m. She was handcuffed, then strangled with a cord. This time, he filmed himself having sex with the corpse, then used a surgical scalpel to dismember her body. He saved both breasts and the entire pubic area to place inside a Tupperware bowl with embalming fluid. He wrapped the rest of the body in newspaper and placed it in a sack. This video was titled, A Serious Secret. He put the rest of the body in the trunk of his cab and threw it down a slope on Tai Hang Road. On June 17th, he picked up 29-year-old street cleaner Luang Sao-Wan on Nathan Road at 4 a.m. She was killed using the same method and taken back to his home. The next day after his family left, he took several pictures of her body and then set up the camera on top of the bed, angling it down so the body was in full view. This video was called Operation Rainy Night, and the dismemberment was much more extensive than the last two, especially since he didn't have to worry about positioning the camera. He cut open her abdomen, pulled out her intestines, and put it to his mouth to taste. He had always wanted to taste human flesh, but he felt sick, so he gave up. He threw the rest of her limbs off that same slope on Tai Hang Road. On July 2nd, He picked up 17-year-old Luang Wai Sum outside the Sheraton Hotel on Salisbury Road at 11 p.m. While in the cab, he talked with her about school, her future, her family, religion, and her soul. Then he handcuffed her before using the electrical cord to end her life. He committed necrophilia again before dismembering her body. She was supposed to be back from a banquet at the hotel, as her parents tried to call her friends to ask about her, but they didn't know where she was either. The family eventually called the police, and they issued a search notice and photos on August 5th to appeal to the public for information, but there were still no results. August 17th, 1982 was a normal day for Lam, as he took a trip to a Kodak shop to get some photos developed. The only problem was that these photos were of his dismembered murder victims. The employee who developed them initially thought this was just some weird fetish content. When he looked closer and saw a severed breast, he notified his manager, who notified the police. When Lam returned to pick up the photos, the police were waiting. When asked about the content of the photos, he claimed that they belonged to a friend of his who worked on the ship who would meet him shortly. So the police stood there and waited. When this mystery man didn't show up, Lam took them to his parents' apartment on Quay Chow Street. They found the ammunition box containing porn magazines and more pictures of body parts, along with videotapes and multiple Tupperware containers with female sexual organs inside. On April 8, 1983, at the end of a long 3-week trial with a 7-man jury, Lam was found guilty of 4 counts of murder and sentenced to death by hanging. On August 29, 1984, his death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment after Sir Edward Youd accepted his mercy plea, which was the tradition before Hong Kong abolished the death penalty in 1993. He is currently serving his life sentence at the maximum security Shek Pik prison. When speaking to psychiatrist Dr. William Green, Lam said that he ate part of the intestine of one of his victims, but it was God who told him to kill the victims, of course. After the trial, all of Lam's photographs and videos were destroyed due to concerns about similar crimes and selling of the videos. It really just amazes me how just absent-minded some of these dudes are. You're going to take photos that you took of a dismembered body to a Kodak shop to be developed. What in your right? You know what? Leave a like, hit that subscribe button, turn my post notifications on. You guys have a great day. I'm out. Peace.